Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Mott, and I am happy to be there with you virtually today. In accordance with the times we are living in, I decided to take some precautions to record this for you versus in person because I have been in close contact with someone else who has been exposed to a positive case. So, although I wholeheartedly believe Trinity has taken all the proper precautions, I decided to err on the side of safety and record my talk for you all today. So here I am. And I do want to say thank you to Joe and to all of the staff for having me back. I believe this is my third time at Trinity, uh, second time speaking for chapel. So thank you all again for having me. Happy Black History Month. This is also the month of my birthday. Also the month of 3 of my family members' birthdays and 4 of my very good friends and 1 of their sons. We're all Black over here making Black history for the world this month, and I'm excited. So this morning, I don't come to you with necessarily a list of brilliant Black inventors, first preachers, first astronauts deserving of recognition today. Please celebrate their marked achievements and please learn about their contributions to this world and the globe. They are inspiring and they have paved the way for me individually in a myriad of ways. And I do not discount that. But I wanted to come to you today to do something a little different, to help us peel back some layers and look deeper into this context of the evangelical form of racism, especially that we hear talked about widely during Black History Month. And so, although I'm not highlighting a list of Black achievement, I do want to include a quote from the founder of Black History Month. Black History Month was created by Dr. Carter G. Woodson. It began as a way of remembering important people and events in the history of the African diaspora. It is celebrated in February in the United States and Canada. And also, it's celebrated in Ireland, the Netherlands, and the UK, and observed in October, if you didn't know that. Dr. Woodson believed that if a race has no history, if it has no worthwhile tradition, then it just becomes a negligible factor in the thought of the world, which has happened to the African diaspora, especially in the West. So he came up with a way to observe marked achievement by Black people. It started off as a week, and then it expanded to a month. And he chose February because he knew eventually I would be born on the 19th of this month. Just kidding. He chose February because it coincided with the birthday of Abraham Lincoln on the 12th and Frederick Douglass on the 20th. Both of those dates have been long celebrated in the Black communities since the 19th century. Dr. Woodson, among other things, among other brilliant things, was a writer. And so I want to start our talk off today from the quote that I said I wanted to include. And the quote reads, "When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions. You do not have to tell him not to stand there or not to go there. He will find his proper place and he'll stay in it. You don't need to send him back to the door." This quote comes from, or can be found in the book, The Miseducation of the Negro. And although he meant this quote to help us see how through chattel slavery, removing a race or ethnic group's ancestry and completely replacing it with another has positioned Black people in the world, I want us to stick with that first part of his quote because it's universally applicable, especially in race relations and talks. And the first part of that quote again says, "When you control a man's thinking, you do not have to worry about his actions." Anybody that knows me well knows I like to dig into narratives, the story behind the actions. And I know we understand broadly in terms of spirituality, this whole mind is a battlefield thing, guarding your mind. but I want to boil it down into the race context. And I want to talk to you all today about narratives, about the stories we tell ourselves and how they affect what some would call racial reconciliation. Now, I have to be honest and upfront and say that the term reconciliation does not resonate with me because, in my opinion, it assumes there was initially a position of intended harmony between races. And we know this, especially in America, is not the case. So I keep saying we need another word. And maybe I'll create a contest for that at some point if somebody can give me another word that's satisfactory to me. However, today we'll use the term as one that provides a plausible solution that has good intentions coming from the church. So if you want to title today's talk, you can title it, Who Told You That? To give you some more framework, more about myself, my talk is not going to be akin to like an algebra solution. We're not going to solve for X today. Honestly, there really are no shortcuts in this discussion, surrounding this discussion. But just to let you guys know, my talks are often leave folks with an unsatisfactory like resolution. And that's because I try to get us more to think with nuance, with information, long term versus giving out, if you do this, this, and this, then you'll get this. Because that's not really how this conversation or this relationship works. So today, we're going to stretch our thinking a little bit further. So first, we're going to do an exercise. I would like everyone to close their eyes for a second. Just close your eyes. Don't worry about the people around you. Close your eyes. We're going to do something real quick. Imagine yourself back in time in Jerusalem or Judea, or go back even before all of that. Imagine yourself in Babylon or Jericho or even Egypt, walking with Lot or Abraham. For kicks, go back to the Garden of Eden. And think about the people around you, your storekeepers, your seamstresses, your priests, your friends, the people you attended worship with, your military, your kings, your queens, or judges. Think about their height, their clothing. Think about the crowds at Passover or weddings and or funerals. Think about the people at the foot of the cross. So scan in your mind's imagery, maybe Job's friends or Noah's boys and their wives, and scan that imagery of what you see or can imagine if you were there. Now, how many of those people that you see in your mind's eye right now look anything like me? Right? You can go ahead and open your eyes. So back to narratives. Narratives inform your faith beliefs. Like Dr. Woodson says, narratives inform our behavior. So if you can't even imagine just one person in the entire Bible across generations and cultures in the Middle Eastern and African part of the world, how does that form your Christianity? How does that inform your Christianity and your Christian approach to race and ethnicity? Most people don't imagine anyone like me when they think of Bible characters. And I can assure you that there were plenty. But our Bible stories, our pictographs, our videos, our movies, the storytellers of those movies and videos and creators of those Sunday school pictographs don't look like me or my brothers or my nieces or my nephews or my parents or family members, some of whom are biracial. How does that imagery inform your faith walk? But more importantly, what stories shaped that imagery? Whose story shaped your imagery? Whose story are you telling? And again, how does this impact your approach to racial equity and relations, and ultimately reconciliation. Even Black people have a hard time seeing Black people that look Black in the Bible. But you got to ask yourself, as a Black person in the room, if you are a non-factor there, you see yourself as a non-factor there, and then in this formation of Christianity, where are you now? How do you see yourself now? So just questions to get you thinking, to get your brain bubbles percolating, and so that we can go into this discussion a little bit further. So what are some of the big rocks we can grab from these questions? When you think about the makeup of Bible leaders, people, stories, shopkeepers, the characters, you develop a racial narrative about faith. We all do. All of us do. This narrative involves my first point, which is the racial makeup of the kingdom of Christianity, of God, and forming the leadership hierarchy in that racial makeup. So the narrative we tell ourselves forms a racial makeup, and within that racial makeup, you're going to form a leadership hierarchy, right? Angela, race isn't real. It's a social construct. True. The idea of the biology of race, absolutely false. We are one species, human species. I think there's a 2% biological difference amongst the human species. As a matter of fact, we have more diversity biologically within our own ethnic groups. And that's another whole tangent that I won't go off on today. But race is a social construct that was made or created to be justified by science, and we have debunked that myth. However, racism is real, and it has informed our worldview of Christianity. And it's made a very straight path to Christ very crooked. I'll use a big Bible word here, iniquity, which means crooked. We've taken something straight and we've made it crooked. And one of the things that we've done to make this crooked is specifically is this idea of supremacy. And you will hear that term used in America, white supremacy. But supremacy is not new. It's not even something that is originated in America by America's white European ancestry. I actually found it in Genesis. So let's look at Genesis really quick. And we're going to start with the story of two famous brothers in Genesis, Cain and Abel. And we'll go to Genesis chapter 4. Genesis chapter 4. We'll start with verse 1 that says, "Now Adam had sexual relations with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant. When she gave birth to Cain, she said, 'With the Lord's help, I have produced a man.' Later, she gave birth to his brother and named him Abel. When they grew up, Abel became a shepherd, while Cain cultivated the ground. And when it was time for harvest, Cain presented some of his crops as gifts to the Lord, and Abel also brought a gift, the best portion of the firstborn lambs from his flock. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but he did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. 'Why are you so angry?' the Lord asked Cain. 'Why do you look so dejected? You will be accepted if you do what is right, but if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you. But you must subdue it and be its master.' One day, Cain suggested to his brother, still angry and ticked off, 'Let's go out into the fields.' And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother, Abel, and killed him. Afterward, the Lord asked Cain, 'Where is your brother? Where is Abel?' 'I don't know,' Cain responded. 'Am I my brother's keeper?' So I've read that story since I was a kid, over and over and over. And I thought it was about Cain just being mean or Cain just being jealous. But again, being the narrative person that I am, I had to ask myself a little bit deeper questions and say, why was he angry? Why was he jealous? Cain assumed, or the story that Cain told himself, was that his sacrifice was to be preferred over Abel's sacrifice. His sacrifice should have been the normative one. He could not understand for the life of him why Abel's was chosen over his, why God preferred Abel, his brothers, over his sacrifice. You see, Cain had the mindset of a supremacist, one that says, I should be preferred, what I do should be normative, what I do should be best, is best. And instead of looking out for his brother with that supremacist mindset, he believed his brother stepped out of his place, and he killed him for it. And that just takes me back to Dr. Woodson's quote. The story Cain told himself was that Abel was out of place. Jealousy, abasement, and murder was the behavior and the action that resulted out of that supremacist narrative. So it's not new. And again, it's something that's made a very straight path to Christ very crooked. And that brings me to our second point. The next point is that we have this faith kingdom narrative of leadership and what hierarchy should look like. And that kingdom model of hierarchy and leadership dictates our social narrative and approach to unity. So Cain's approach to unity was based off of his narrative, right? We also have a narrative. If our narrative doesn't include people like me leading the charge for social justice, we can assume that there are people who don't look like me that should. And so that dictates, again, our social narrative and our approach to unity. And when we have a majority of those people, you tend to believe that unity looks a certain way. So we attend church together, right? We attend school, sports events together. There are neighborhoods where we all live together. And the narrative is, or seems to be, that we are united. At least that's what we hear. But then something like George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna Taylor, or let's go back to Trayvon Martin or Philando Castile or Sandra Bland, happens. And people speak against that narrative. And you can see that we are not united. And then the church usually jumps in and rushes in, chanting reconciliation. But we cannot promote our spiritual bonds across races without admitting these flawed spiritual narratives. Ones that put minority ethnic groups, specifically we'll speak about my ethnic group, into social bonds. Social bonds that have created disparities and have caused people to believe that people who look like me or people who are of other minority groups, will use Blacks in this case, will use Ahmaud Arbery for an example, deserve what was coming for jogging in an all-white neighborhood while Black. People don't believe that. People do believe that. And that's why he's not with us today. So you cannot talk about reconciliation without mentioning this meta-narrative of nationalism, one that includes a history of slavery, one that includes some great principles and has done some amazing things for this country and the world, and includes a history of slavery, of displacing indigenous people, of putting in Asians in concentration camps here, of creating disparity, of creating Jim Crow in this country that was backed spiritually. in America, that church's commission, that churches use to perpetuate this flawed narrative of who should be in charge and the hierarchy in that narrative. And then the downstream effects of it. we still see it played out today. So you can be spiritually unified. We can all go to church and say we're going to worship God today and be completely emotionally segregated. You can be legally integrated. I can live pretty much wherever I want legally, and still be emotionally segregated. And that's not unity. So that leads me to my next point. If the narrative about the hierarchy and the leadership model is flawed, which flaws our approach to the social aspect of it, then the entire reconciliation model is flawed. The reconciliation model is based on how we should approach the social narrative. And that's maybe, just maybe, why we continue to find ourselves right back here again, groping to make sense of it all. Thinking that something happened 60, 70 years ago is over, and then within the last 12 months, we've seen it happen example after example after example with these reconciliation models in place. And you have to ask yourself, why are we not discussing race in church? Why are the approaches seemingly those that sweep these painful issues, some of what I've mentioned in plain speak today, under the rug? Why is colorblindness the primary approach? And it goes back to these narratives. It goes back to who told you that. So what's the solution? Remember, I told you we're not solving for X today. Sweeping change doesn't come from one speech or one talk or more information. It comes from individual daily self-examination. So I do have some tips for you though. Let's consider tip number 1, the first and second commandment. Let's read Matthew chapter 22 here. And we'll read verses 37 through 40, which say, and Jesus replied, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. A second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these 2 commandments." Angela, I've heard this verse a million times, especially if you're in the room and you're of the group that has received historically the oppression. These are hard verses. And most of the time they're hard because we have interpreted them incorrectly. The word love in these verses is not a feeling. The word love is an action word. Agapao is the Greek form of the word, and it means to actively prefer, morally preference, embrace, choose, obey, and select. It's a discriminating choice to choose God over everything else with all your heart, mind, soul. And it directly informs the second commandment. The second doesn't happen without the first. Same word, actively prefer, embrace your neighbor, above, select, choose, embrace, above, or as yourself. So God does his work in us through the first commandment, and God does his work in the world through the second commandment. And Jesus simplified it and says, basically, all of the laws and demands of the prophets are based on these 2 commandments, the whole of the gospel. Also including, taking care of the widow and the orphan. That's all wrapped up in that second commandment. So consider the first and second commandment. Next tip, remember nuance and respect it. Nuance is essential for harmony, okay? So harmony doesn't happen when everything sounds the same. And in music, when everything sounds the same, it's a sequence of single notes. That's called a melody. Harmony is a combination of notes played together, really to create a progression. We're going somewhere with this harmony, with this nuance. And nuance gives you a full picture and experience and appreciation so that you don't form a single narrative for reconciliation. Respect nuance. Unity is, this is my third tip, unity is not a vehicle. I'm sorry. Unity is a vehicle. It's not an endpoint. Unity is a vehicle, not an endpoint. Unity is not sameness. Unity happens when we have a shared knowledge of history. When we understand biblical history started and what we now know as Africa. So the rivers mentioned in Genesis in the Garden of Eden, one of them is located in Africa. Unity happens when we understand that Black history did not begin with slavery. Unity happens when we understand the continent of Africa is a continent, not a country. And it was not always called the continent of Africa. It was a bunch of kingdoms that were reigned by different people, similar, very similar to the United States. Unity happens when we remember that America does not own the rights to Christian faith, that Christianity is global in scope, with African and Middle Eastern origins. So in these battle cries for reconciliation, we can often hear, let's just all get along, basically. If we don't have a deeper understanding of unity, then only one person gets to decide what getting along looks like. And we have to remember that unity is not best handled in white-only hands or one race-only hands. Everyone's ethnic group, ancestry, and heritage has the right to steer this vehicle towards biblical concept of unity. The last tip is to get rid of false equivalencies, or what I call tit for tat. I'm a sister of, I have two sisters and one brother. And one of the things siblings do is they'll tell themselves, well, if they get a good grade in school, that takes away from me. If they get to go play outside longer, that takes away from my privileges. And we see that happen in race discussions all over. Black people doing excellent things does not take away from white people doing excellent things. Having a month where we observe achievements by Blacks across the diaspora, especially after the institution of slavery and Jim Crow and segregation, does not take away from the excellent things that white Europeans have done, or whites of European descent have done. Your Cuban friend speaking Spanish does not take away from your original English tongue. We have to remember to get rid of these false equivalencies. We're all here on this planet. We all have the experiences that we have, and we all have the same placement in God's eyes of the right to be here. And no one in this room has an ethnic or spiritual heritage that should only be boxed into specifically white American or white evangelical American history. Christianity doesn't start there. So in closing, I haven't really given you any answers. I'm just giving you lots of things to think about and lots of things to discuss. And that is how we move this conversation forward. And that is how we move progress forward. Black history is written every day. Today, I'm holding the pen for Trinity. I can tell you 50 years ago, you would not see a Black female, not married, not a missionary from another country speaking to you about race relations and digging through the Bible with you on this topic. Maybe inside of the 50 years, you would not have seen that. But I'm here today because of the achievements of my ancestors and other Blacks who pushed and paved the way for me to do so, and for Christians who do understand nuance and we do understand that unity is a moving vehicle. So as you observe these inventors and giants of Black ancestry, observe them as human beings with everything to lose, including their lives, as some of them did. Observe them as people of faith. Observe them as fathers, as mothers, as sisters, as brothers, as people who said no when the country and the country's church said yes to dehumanization and supremacy. People who champion life, ancestors. And ask yourself if the civil rights was happening during today, or if the civil rights acts and movements were happening during the time that Jesus walked on earth, who would have been the Pharisees? And who would have been the ones fighting for justice? And which group do you find yourselves in? And my final point, who has informed your thinking about Christianity? What has informed your thinking about Christianity? What ideology has informed your thinking and its role in race relations? And where has that placed you in the hierarchy? And does that placement align with the biblical narrative of kingdom? And if not, what are you going to do about it? So let's pray. Father, nothing will deny you the glory that is yours, represented in hair color, shades, texture, height, girth, width of all peoples, languages of all people. We won't put down the manufacturer of color by race and color anymore. And we will work out our salvation through preferring and placing you above else so that we can prefer our neighbors as ourselves. We don't want to minimize the faulty narratives as just sin. These things have names, and their names leave lasting impact. Today we call it out and we move against it, starting where we are. Starting with conversations with family, with policies, looking at hiring practices and positioning, and thinking about the stories we have told ourselves. And alluding to Dr. Woodson again, we will interrogate what has been controlling our thinking around racism and race relations, ethnicity and heritage, and we will prefer your heart above all else. In Jesus' name, amen. So thank you all for having me today. You can find me on Instagram at Angela N for Nicole Mott, M-O-T-T. So Angela at Angela N Mott. There you'll find links to my personal website where I write blog posts and I archive Black history and things of the Black diaspora, and also a link to another website, which is my organization that I founded called Matriarch. It's spelled with 2 I's, and it's a platform, organization, and community for Black females, the 2 I's, 2 identities, who are looking to learn more, lead more in social change, and to build thriving and healthy communities, to kind of attack the disparities that communities of color, specifically Black communities, and even more specifically, economically, socially depressed Black communities face every day through policy change and legislation, of course, with the heart for Christ. So again, you can find me at Angela N Mott. I don't do Twitter very much. I have a Twitter, but I'm not even going to give it to you guys because I never use it. I would love to see you guys on Instagram though. Message me, join me in this movement of Matriarch. And thank you again so much for having me. And I pray that you all have a blessed afternoon. Thanks. Bye-bye.